And so it begins. We got a packed lecture today. So, welcome to lecture 11 of my classical Greek introductory course. Today we are learning the inflection of the demonstrative pronoun hutos, haute, tuto, which you find on page 94, section 714 in the Cambridge Grammar of Classical Greek. Then we have a new comprehensive moment in our grammatical studies, which is to say that we are taking on a new tense to add to the present, the imperfect and the future, which are the ones we have learned so far. The new tense we will take on today is the aorist, and we will begin with aorist 1, or the so-called Sigmatic Aorist. In fact, in connection with this lecture, we will overview all the moods of the Sigmatic Aorist, both in the active and the medial voice. The passive aorist, however, we will save for later. After we have looked at the paradigms for the aorist, we will wrap up the lecture with the discussion of the function of the aorist. But let us begin with the new demonstrative pronoun we have on our agenda today. This is hutos in the masculine, haute in the feminine, and tuto in the neutral. Previously, we've been acquainted with another demonstrative pronoun, hode, hede, tode, which likewise means this or that. And in fact, the difference in meaning between these two pronouns is often difficult to discern. As a rule of thumb, however, can be said that hode is typically used when the thing referred to lies closer to the speaker, whereas hutos is used generally for more distant objects, while a third alternative demonstrative pronoun, ekeinos, ekeine, ekeino, may refer to something completely out of reach. Further, on the level of the text, hutos often refers backwards towards something that has already been said, while hode may refer to something that will be said in what follows. But let us overview the full paradigm of the demonstrative pronoun hutos. So we have here in the masculine singular hutos, tutu, tuto, tuton, and in the feminine haute, tautes, taute, tauteen, and in the neutral tuto, tutu, tuto, tuto. And in the plural we have in the masculine hutoi, tuton, tutois, tutus, and in the feminine hautai, tuton, tautais, tautas, and in the neutral tauta, tuton, tutois, tautta. In fact, there is nothing particularly noteworthy about these inflections. They follow the first declension in the feminine and the second declension in the masculine and neutral, as we can see. Fine, let us turn to the aorist then. The name aorist derives from the Greek aoristos, which means without limit or undefined. By the way, the Greeks also used the term chronos, which we are familiar with, as a grammatical term in the meaning of tense. It is only in the indicative mood that the aorist is used to express past happening or actions. In other moods, for instance in the subjunctive and the optative the aorist is neutral with regard to the time of the expressed event or action. In other words, the aorist in these moods does not point specifically either to the past, the present, or the future. An aorist optative, for instance, can relate to any of the three. But we will return to the meaning of the aorist later. There are four different main categories of aorists in classical Greek. The Sigmatic Aorist, the Aorist 2, Kappa Aorists, and Root Aorists. Today we will learn the paradigms for Sigmatic Aorist. In the Sigmatic Aorist, the aorist stem, just like the name suggests, is formed by adding a sigma infix to the present stem of the verb, exactly like in the future forms of thematic verbs. The sigma infix thus falls between the root and the ending of the verb, which ending is an alpha in the active indicative first person singular. Further, the aorist indicative, just like the imperfect forms we have looked at before, typically also take an augment, which in the normal case, that is when the stem of the verb begins with a consonant, is represented by an epsilon. In the first person singular, the aorist active indicative of our paradigmatic verb paideuo with the root paideu thus becomes epaideusa, I educated. And at this point it should be underlined that only the indicative mood of the aorist is augmented. All other moods, as well as the participles and infinitives, lack an augment in the aorist. In other words, the aorist subjunctive, optative, imperative, infinitive, and the aorist participles all lack an augment. But they do have the sigma infix. Thus, for instance, the first person singular aorist active subjunctive is paideuso, which just so happens to be formally identical with the first person singular future active indicative. The formation of the stems in the Sigmatic Aorist follows the same principle as the future stems. So just like in the future forms we have looked at, if the root of the verb ends in a vowel, except if this vowel is part of a diphthong, this vowel is typically lengthened. That is before the sigma infix in the Sigmatic Aorist forms. Hence, miseo, I hate, becomes in the aorist indicative emisesa, I hated. Agapao, I love, becomes egapesa, I loved. Plero, I feel, becomes eplerosa, I filled. While pleo, I sail, becomes epleusa, I sailed, because of the loss of an original digamma, which I have mentioned before. Remember also that when an alpha is lengthened in Attic Greek, it usually becomes an eta, except after one of the letters epsilon, iota, or rho. Also, when the root of the stem ends in a consonant, the rules for the formation of the Sigmatic Aorist stem are the same as for the Sigmatic future. Thus, the labials p, beta, and phi become psi. The velars kappa, gamma, and chi becomes xi, while the dentals tau, delta, theta, and zeta are typically erased when they meet the sigma of the sigma infix. Just a moment. Okay, fine. Let us turn to the first full paradigm of today then, which is that of the aorist active indicative. Here we have epaideusa in the first person singular, epaideusas in the second person singular, epaideusen in the third person singular, epaideusamen in the first person plural, epaideusate in the second person plural, and epaideusan in the third person plural. Note here the presence of the augment and sigma infix in all forms, as well as the fact that there is a thematic vowel in the form of an alpha present between the stem and the ending in most of these forms. Fine, the aorist active subjunctives are next then. So here we have paideuso in the first person singular, paideuses in the second person singular, paideuse in the third person singular, paideusomen in the first person plural, paideusete in the second person plural, paideusosin in the third person plural. As was the case in the present subjunctive, the active aorist subjunctive is characterized by the long thematic vowels. And in fact, the endings are the same in the subjunctive, in the present, and the aorist tense. So the only thing that sets them apart is actually the sigma infix. Note also that the aorist subjunctive is lacking the augment. Fine. Next we have the active aorist optative. These in turn are formed by placing a specific aorist optative infix between the stem and the ending. And this optative infix is I, which you can find in most forms of the Sigmatic Aorist optative. So the full paradigm of the aorist optative active is paideusai, paideusaimi in the first person singular, paideusais or paideuseias in the second person singular, paideusai or paideuseien in the third person singular, paideusaimen in the first person plural, paideusaite in the second person plural, and paideusaien or paideusejan in the third person plural. The alternative forms that you see here are actually Iolic Greek forms, but they are included in the paradigm since they do also occur in Attic Greek. Here we have the aorist imperative active forms. These also lack an augment and are as follows. Paideuson in the second person singular, paideusato in the third person singular, paideusate in the second person plural, in the second person plural it's paideusate, and paideusanton or paideusatosan in the third person plural. As I said, the aorist imperative is lacking tense, so it can be used in the present, just like the present imperatives. Then we have the aorist infinitive active here as well, which is paideusai. Fine, let us look at the active aorist participle then, with the verb lyo, which means to loosen, as our example. The paradigm for the active aorist participle for this verb looks like this, and it's the same paradigm also in paideuo. So here the stem of the verb is actually this ly. So everything that comes after this ly part is part of the active aorist participle ending. So as you can see, there is a strong presence of this Sigmatic Aorist infix in all numbers and cases and genders of these participles. The sigma is there in all of them. And there's also this thematic vowel alpha, which is another feature which marks these aorist participles. So this is also how you can recognize an aorist participle by looking at the sigmatic sigma infix and then the alpha theme vowel. Otherwise, as you can see, there is a certain resemblance in the inflection of this paradigm to the active present participle, in that the masculine and the neuter are inflected according to the third declension, while the feminine forms are inflected according to the first declension. And the masculine and neuter forms have this nt in the middle of the ending in all cases except for the nominative singular and the dative plural. Otherwise, there is nothing especially noteworthy here. Of course, you can also recognize that it's actually only these two last letters, or the last letter in some cases, which is inflected. So the rest of the participle actually stays the same. So this ant, for instance, recurs in almost all numbers and cases in the masculine and neuter. But this is another paradigm which is good to learn by heart if you just have the opportunity to do so. All right, but let's turn to the medial forms then. This is quite a packed PowerPoint, because we're not going to go through all of these medial forms individually. You will have to learn them more thoroughly by yourself then later in preparation for the exam maybe. But if we look at these indicative forms here, you can see that they are again augmented, just like in the active. So the indicative is the only mood which is augmented in the aorist, and that holds also for the medial forms. And then there is, of course, the presence of this sigmatic aorist infix, as well as the theme vowel alpha in most persons and numbers. And then if we turn to the subjunctive forms, we can see again that it's of course lacking this augment, but there is this sigma infix. And then the endings, just like in the active case, are again identical to the present medial passive subjunctive endings. So here actually again we have the case that the subjunctive is distinguished from the aorist subjunctive is distinguished from the present subjunctive merely by this by the presence of this sigma infix. So for instance, the first person singular medio-passive subjunctive of paideomai is of course paideomai, and in the aorist it's then just paideosomai. So there's only this sigma infix which sets them apart. The aorist medial optative forms have again this infix this aorist optative infix I, which is clearly visible in all persons and numbers, as you can see. So that's how you can recognize an Sigmatic aorist optative by this I infix. Then if you look at the imperatives, the second person singular by Deusai actually looks very much like the active aorist infinitive, but there is the difference that this accent here is an acute. In the active aorist infinitive, the accent is a circumflex. So that's how we can set them apart. The infinitive is Paideussastai. And then if you turn to these participle forms, which you can see here at the bottom of the screen, we can again note that they have, of course, this sigma infix, and then also this thematic alpha vowel. And actually this medial aorist participles look quite a lot like the present medial passive participles, in that they have this same men part of the ending. So you find this men in all three genders. And this men as part of the ending is actually a very good way to recognize a medial participle form. Yes, and of course they are just like in the present medial passive participle, they are inflected in the second declension in the masculine and the neuter. So the ending os or on is the part which is inflected here, and then they are inflected in the first declension in the feminine. So then it's this eta here at the end, which is inflected in the first declension. Yes, and also remember what I said in the beginning of the lecture, which was that there are specific passive aorist forms which are distinct from the medial passive forms, from the medial aorist forms, I mean. We will look at the passive aorist in connection with a later lecture. All right. Next, we have two specific aorist stems of the aorist 1 type, which are formed somewhat differently than the ones we have looked at so far. More specifically, they lack the sigma infix. Aorist of this type have a stem ending in a liquid, lamba or raw, or a nasal, a my or a ny consonant. The first example we have of this is angello, I report. The active aorist indicative of this verb is engela. Further, we have meno, I wait, and the active aorist indicative of this is emeina. So what has happened here is that the sigma infix in the aorist form has simply disappeared. And this disappearance has caused a compensatory lengthening in the stem, so that the short e sound has turned into the diphthong a. But the person endings in these verbs are the same as in normal sigmatic aorists. Fine. Let us turn to the last topic of today then, which is the function or the meaning of the aorist. If we remember, the imperfect in classical Greek is used to express an ongoing action in the past. So the meaning of the active imperfect epaideuon is I was educated. The aorist indicative, on the other hand, generally expresses a completed past action. So of the Greek verb forms, it is actually the aorist indicative which is often best translated with the basic past tense in modern English, the so-called simple past. Hence, the active aorist indicative epaideusa can often be quite accurately translated as I educated. However, depending on context, a translation in the pluperfect or past perfect may be a better alternative in English. Thus, epaideusa could also be translated as I had educated. However, as far as I can see at least, in the next chapter of our textbook, chapter 10, all the aorist indicatives encountered in the text can be quite adequately translated into English by using a verb in the simple past. Another way of stating the core difference between the aorist indicative and the imperfect is that the action captured by the aorist can be overviewed as a whole, while an action given expression to with the verb in the imperfect tense cannot be thus grasped. It should also be mentioned at this point that the imperfect can be used to express repeated actions, and that both the imperfect and the aorist can express the initial state of events. That is, we can have ingressive aorists or inceptive or immediative imperfects in the past as well. And of course, there are many more specific uses of both the imperfect and the aorist indicative, which we will not deal with today, however. Please also bear in mind what I said in the beginning of this lecture, namely that it is only in the indicative mood that the aorist is used specifically to refer to the past, while in the other moods, the time of the depicted event or action may lie in the present or in the future as well. Fine. Next in turn, we have the use of the aorist participle. Again, we will merely concentrate here on the core meaning, if you like, of these verb forms, and for the time being, leave aside any more specific uses. The aorist participle is most often used to express a preceding action that has also been completed. For instance, in the phrase kyros eteleutese basileusas, we have the active aorist participle basileusas from basileuo, I am king, which in relation to the predicate in the aorist indicative eteleutese from teletao, I die, gives expression to a preceding event. This phrase could thus be translated as Cyrus died after having been king. Now, if the participle in this phrase would be in the present tense instead, which is to say that the phrase would read kyros eteleutese basileuon, the participle basileuon would not express a preceding completed action at all, but rather the opposite. That is, an action which is uncompleted, simultaneous, and ongoing. Or at least ongoing in relation to the time of the events depicted in the phrase. So in this case, the phrase would translate as Cyrus died while being king. Thank you.